So I'm very happy and honored to have two inspiring speakers with us today who want to present their case and learnings. First, we're going to start with, and I will also want to give the floor to Don Gilbert. He's the Director of the Gig Economy Organizing at the National Domestic Workers Alliance, the NDWA. This is a leading advocacy organization working for the respect, recognition, and rights for millions of nannies, house cleaners, and home care workers in the US. The Alliance is powered by over 60 affiliated organizations, plus local chapters, and has won legislation protecting domestic workers' rights in 8 states. So Don, really cool you're here. So thanks for being here. I think we can fill maybe 3 webinars with your knowledge and your activities, but we will do the limit of a short presentation today. So I would love to give the floor to you.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you to the other panelists. I know we're going to try to stick to time, so I'll try to limit it. I'm really excited to be able to speak with all of you. It's nice to see some familiar faces. I got my start organizing in the gig economy in 2013. Previously, I'd been organizing taxi drivers, and then the second city Uber launched in after San Francisco was Seattle. Where a group of drivers wanted to know whether or not they had the right to unionize. Eventually, we passed a law that allowed collective bargaining rights for drivers there. But that was only the beginning, and we've seen a massive shift in the way that these companies have started to intervene. And at NDWA, as others have mentioned, we've always worked to represent domestic workers who have been precariously employed, insecurely employed, had a lack of access to benefits, had a lack of access to protections and basic rights that other workers have since Reconstruction following the Civil War in the US. And then even after the New Deal, domestic workers continue to be excluded until today. So NDWA has made a number of different interventions. I'm not going to talk about all of them in the next few minutes, but I just want to highlight some of them. So in 2010, we passed the first domestic worker bill of rights in New York State. This was one of our strategies. So policy as an overarching umbrella has been one of our strategies. Since then, we've been able to pass those similar domestic worker bill of rights in 10 states, and as well as 2 municipalities in Seattle and Philadelphia. It creates new rights such as protection from discrimination and paid time off. In 2019, we introduced a federal bill with then Senator Kamala Harris and Pramila Jayapal, who's a congresswoman from Washington. And the federal bill includes domestic workers and commonplace workplace rights and protections, and calls for things like paid sick days, meal and rest breaks, fair scheduling, and support for survivors of sexual harassment, as well as grants for training. We've made other policy interventions since then. In 2018, there was a company that entered the market, and at that time, they were dispatching about 100,000 cleaning jobs per month. They were called Handy. They've since been acquired by Angie, which has been acquired by IAC, which also owns Care.com, which Julia talked about earlier. So it's kind of a behemoth in terms of the companies it controls. It also controls other huge segments of the internet outside of the care and domestic work market, but we won't talk too much about that. But we intervened in 2018 while Handy was going around the country working to put in laws that would permanently codify domestic workers on platforms as independent contractors and bar them from seeking the basic rights and protections. And what that would have done would have been to undermine the domestic worker bill of rights that we had worked so hard to pass over the past decade. So we intervened and we were successful in many states, and in some places we were not. Following that, we continued to put pressure on that company as well as others to increase pay. As we heard, it's the biggest problem that domestic workers on platforms are facing worldwide. That's consistent with what we are hearing even up to now. We engaged in a prolonged negotiation with the company. They were prompted to that negotiation because of the political pressure they were feeling, because of the work we and others, our organization and domestic workers on the ground, were doing. In 2021, we launched a pilot program, and we did so in 3 states where workers were already permanently codified as independent contractors. That was on purpose because we wanted to make sure we weren't going to in any way inhibit potential laws that could make domestic workers employees or could give them more rights or give them access to a union. So we specifically chose what are called in the US right to work states and places where these misclassification, marketplace contractor bills, as we call them, had already passed. The result of that pilot was that there was a nationwide increase on the platform from local minimum wage, which could have been as low as $7.25 to $15 an hour across the board. So every worker using the platform in the country immediately saw a raise to $15 an hour, which is not still a living wage, but is a drastic increase for those workers who are making their local minimum wage or the federal minimum wage, which is $7.25. Additionally, the pilot included $1.50 per hour that would go directly to workers as paid time off and provide them with some on-the-job insurances to cover them in the event of an injury. It also allowed us to have monthly meetings with the company, with their general counsel and with upper management, as well as with a group of expert workers who could talk directly to what they were seeing on the platforms in terms of what needed to change, what was going well, and what was really making it hard for them to feel like they were doing good work or having a good job. Since the pilot, workers have earned almost $200,000 in paid time off, and that's only in 3 states. That's Kentucky, Indiana, and Florida. The company continues to operate nationwide and has expanded to a few other countries as well. We're currently in negotiations to figure out whether or not we can continue the pilot and whether there are opportunities to expand it. And we continue to push for our federal legislation as well as local legislation. So we reintroduced our federal Bill of Rights, and for the first time ever this year, we had a hearing at the federal level where our executive director as well as worker leaders testified before Congress. In addition to the pilot, an important intervention that we made was to create the first ever portable benefits platform for domestic workers in 2019. This is called ALEA. The idea is that any employer, whether you're just a single household or you're a big company like Handy, you could contribute to domestic workers' paid time off into an account. And then whether the worker had legal status in the US or was able to get a bank account or whatever their standing would be, ALEA would collect the money and then distribute it directly to workers so that there were fewer barriers to them accessing that money. And we've used ALEA to distribute the money also that workers have earned through the pilot with Handy. So it continues to be an innovative and interesting intervention. We also used ALEA to figure out how to offer benefits at the municipal level in places like Philadelphia, where we've been able to pass laws. Aside from our technological intervention, we've also done an investing strategy where domestic workers have actually interviewed tech startups that are trying to come into this space and to have platforms that are going to do this type of dispatching or intermediary work, and to actually invest in those platforms from the outset that commit to creating good, decent jobs with fair pay and access to problem solving, whether that's meeting with company executives or if that's through some other process that allows workers to have a say in what's happening on those platforms. So we've employed a number of different strategies and continue to do so and continue to think about more ways to innovate. One thing that I did want to talk about, just based on Ayesha's point about commissions, is that I remember it was 2013 and we were very outraged that Uber was taking 35% of every ride as a commission. And we thought that this is so far from what any company has done before. And it's so far outside of the spectrum of what's reasonable to take when they're really just providing the service of connecting a worker and a customer, which is still what these platforms are doing in the domestic work context. And for the present day context, we found that if you're booking a job using the Handy or Angie app, the customer is paying a 70% of the amount the total amount is going directly to the company. So workers are getting $15 an hour for a 3-hour job, but the job may be billed to the customer at over $250. And the worker doesn't know that unless they ask the customer, how much did you pay? And the customer doesn't know that unless they ask the worker, how much are you getting paid? And so it's really insidious how this is happening. And the fact that it's more than double the commission that even Uber was charging. And we always talk about Uber as this like behemoth example of what's wrong with platform economy or what could happen if things go really wrong. But these companies in the domestic workspace have taken it to the next level. And they're taking 70% fully, and that they're still providing the service of connecting a client to a worker. They're not cleaning, they're not carrying vacuums on subway stations, they're not going into people's homes during a pandemic, but we're still seeing this happening. The final intervention that I'll talk about was just that in 2020 during the pandemic, we created a immediate response fund. It was the Coronavirus Care Fund. We were able to raise about $32 million in funding that went directly to domestic workers who lost hours or lost wages or lost jobs because of the pandemic. And we used, again, our ALIA system to be able to deliver that money directly to domestic workers around the country. About 200,000 people benefited from that. And so I know that we're not going to be able to get into the details of each of these interventions, but I did want to share that there's hope. I did want to share that there's a lot of new issues coming up. And one of our next steps in terms of intervening is going back to our policy strategy and actually working to limit the commissions that these companies can take. And so we're going to be introducing legislation around the country shortly that would cap the amount that these companies can take, which would in turn increase the take-home pay for domestic workers. We know that there's not a one-size-fits-all solution, and that this isn't going to necessarily change the lives of every domestic worker. But what we do know is that the aggregation of these companies presents a lot of challenges, but also presents opportunities where we can, in a fell swoop, make a big change that can impact people at home in a way that we have struggled to do with individual household employers in the past. And so we're looking forward to the future of work and the interventions that domestic workers can make in it. And we're really excited to be able to try to keep up with the pace of innovation within our own organization to make sure that domestic workers are at the forefront, given that they are the original gig workers. So I'll hand over, I think, back to Martin before we get to our next panelist.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you very much, Don, for your contribution.
Thank you.
Really nice to see how you really, with your organization, pick different approaches, and also that they're also lead by example. Because at the moment that people see it is possible, then they don't have a excuse of not doing it. And I really like it about your approach. So thank you very much for your contribution. From there we go to the next panelist or next best practice, also looking to the time. And maybe Don, if you maybe can share some links in the chats, or else we will share it also within the aftermail you will receive next week with some additional information about the projects you talked about, because I think it was really inspiring. And from here we go to the next best practice. Because we're talking about also in the story of Dawn about some big bad platforms, let's call them like that, who are also really increasing information asymmetry, not for the benefits of the worker, but for the benefits of the shareholders. But of course, there are also some platforms who are trying to do the right thing. And I think this is also why I like that we have here Juan Sebastian Cavadit from Hungaru, who will join us here today. So Hungaru is a on-demand cleaning platform where cleaners are formally and legally employed by the company with all benefits. And from my perspective, this best practice is really interesting to learn what the platform can do, but also shows how the government can also create the right environment that gives ground for stakeholders that want to do good. So I think that's also my interest also in the case of Hungaru. So Juan, I will give you the floor, and looking forward to hear your story and your lessons.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you for the invitation. It's great to share this panel with everyone. It's really interesting, and it makes me proud to be able to represent some of the good practices. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully you can see it by now. Yeah.
Yes, perfect.
Great. So as Martin said, I'm CEO at Hungaru. We're a local platform in Colombia. So I'm here to share the other side of this conversation. So why does Hungaru exist? As Claire said at the beginning, there are several million female domestic workers in Latin America, 78% of which don't have access to social security. So when we see this amount of domestic work that doesn't have a basic safety net, that doesn't have access to like normal benefits that other workers would have, we saw an opportunity to provide value. We saw an opportunity to generate impact, not only for these women, but also their families. Like we perceived that female domestic workers are the core most of the times of their families, and being able to improve their financial security allows us to make a bigger impact. So what's the timeline for domestic workers in Colombia and its formalization? In 2011, it's when the ILO convention was established, which was ratified in Colombia in 2014. We started our operations in 2015, but only until 2016 did the local government actually make it mandatory for every domestic worker to have all the benefits. That's like paid leave, maternity leave, having access to healthcare and pensions. And since then, it's been mostly an uphill swing of the formalization rate. We've seen different startups, not only Ogaru, but different startups come into this sector and start adding value and start like enabling customers to have access to workers in a formalized way. 2020 with COVID actually like hit us pretty hard, especially in the formalization rate. Many customers that were already having access to formal work decided to go back to informality. Given the uncertainty, a lot of jobs were lost during the first months of COVID. And now in 2022, there's some kind of uncertainty on how government is going to keep pushing the formalization agenda, adding a lot of burden to the employer can also impact the formalization rate. If it's too bureaucratic, if there's too many processes associated with the formalization of workers, then it can also kind of push workers towards informality. So what do we actually do in Ogaru? We're focused on connecting that two-sided market that was mentioned previously, between the home professional, as we call them, and the customer. We started with a cleaning service, that's Ogaru Limpia. And kind of like going back to Julia's point, we're not disrupting this industry. We're just taking what's already there and adding a tech layer on top of it. So we saw that there was a need from customers, not only to outsource the cleaning work to us, but they also wanted to hire employees themselves, domestic workers themselves. So we started a domestic work agency, which is Ogaru Encuentra. But then we noticed that customers were also scared of the regulation around domestic work in Colombia. So we helped them with all the bureaucratic work for them to be able to actually give formal work. That's Ogaru Aporta. And finally, during COVID, the need for expanding our services outside of cleaning services and into home care, that customers really started to ask for that. So we launched Ogaru Cuida. And through these 4 services, we've had access to more than 230,000 women in Colombia, having more than 8,000 of them benefit directly from Ogaru. What's our strategy or our differentiation? We believe that this two-sided marketplace must be balanced. Ayush was making a point around there is some power imbalance towards the customer. Part of our job is to make sure that imbalance is fixed, and that the home professional is actually happy and benefits from this relationship. Actually, our North Star metric is the number of weekly hours spent in a marriage. That's kind of the term we use, symbolizing that we're looking for home professionals and customers to be happy with that relationship, and that they want to move forward with that relationship, that they that they are content and content with that relationship. And what we've seen during the past 8 years is that, like, throughout the whole process, there's a lot of value to add. Here are like the 5 main stages where we kind of intervene. It's not only at the beginning of the connection between the customer and the worker. It's also like all through the life cycle. So we provide background checks, we help in the selection process, we help with the hiring and the formalization, we help with training and with the relationship management, hopefully many years into the future. What has been our impact in the past 8 years? We've had, well, as I mentioned before, more than 8,000 domestic workers benefit directly from Ogaru. 42% of them are the single source of income in their homes. And so we're helping a lot of single mothers, single sources of income to have a stable source of income. 91% have increased their income when they started working with us. We pay minimum wage, but on top of that, we have a benefits plan that can increase by 40% their income. And this is something unheard of in domestic work in Colombia. And 63% of our workers received social security benefits for the first time while at Ogaru, meaning that 63% of them were coming from informality, basically. Outside of the financial impact that we seek to generate, we are also helping our workers achieve more than just a stable income. Our goal is to help them achieve their dreams as well. Most of them, this is a word cloud of a survey that we do when they start working with us. I'm sorry for the noise that's in here. The word cloud shows like that there's a lot of projects and dreams that our workers have when they get into Ogaru. They're looking for education, they're looking to buy their house, they're looking to take care of their children. So it's also part of our mission to help them achieve these goals while working at Ogaru. And just to make it quick on some takeaways on what has been our experience in with domestic workers in Colombia. Government policy can make or break a business in domestic work. When we really started to see our business thrive was when the Colombian government made it mandatory to have social security for domestic workers. That really started to change the culture in Colombia and to make it important to have access to formalization. But it's also important to keep in mind that adding too much of a burden can push employees back into informality. The second takeaway that I would like to share is that there are different ways to add value in the formalization of domestic work. We started with kind of outsourcing the cleaning service, but we've been understanding our customers' needs are a lot broader, and it's possible to keep adding value, and customers are willing to pay if we help them in different stages of the process. And finally, spending on the well-being of domestic workers should not be seen as a cost. It's an investment for growth. Actually, our biggest challenge to grow Ogaru is to have enough supply. We strive to get enough workers sign up into our platform. That's part of the reason why we also invest so much in the benefits plan for the worker, on top of what's legally mandatory. So we see it as an investment, not as a cost. That's the first remarks, Martin.
So great, thank you very much, Juan. Maybe it's a really inspiring case, and also thanks for sharing it with us here today online. So thanks, Juan, for your contribution, and also thanks to Don. And I think this also really rounds up the circle, because in the end, Claire Hobden in the start said something about, okay, you can have policy and regulation theory, but in theory, but in the end, you need to have several initiatives to take it also into practice. And I think both the cases of Don and of Juan are a really good example on how to make this happen. So thank you very much for this. And now I would like to give the floor to Olivia for a really quick wrap up.